Welcome to today's series lesson. We are looking at the reasons why Nehemiah carried out religious reforms in Judah. Number one, to preserve the identity of the Israelites as the people of God. Number two, to separate the Jews from foreign influence. Another reason was to purify the temple which had been defiled by foreigners. Number four, to reinstate the services of the Levites and priests in the temple. Another reason why Nehemiah carried out religious reforms in Judah is in order to restore the tithing system which had been neglected. Number six, to end violation of the Sabbath law. It was also in order to cleanse the Jews who had intermarried foreigners. And at number eight, to restore the true worship of God. Outline the challenges Nehemiah encountered while rebuilding the wall of Jerusalem. Then we describe the activities which took place during the dedication of the wall of Jerusalem under the leadership of Nehemiah. Then lastly, we give reasons why Christians find it difficult to help the needy today. Challenges Nehemiah encountered while rebuilding the wall of Jerusalem. Number one, the officials of Tekoa refused to cooperate with him. He was ridiculed by Sanballat and Tobiah. He received threats of violence from the enemies. A trap was laid to derail his mission of rebuilding the wall. There was a plot to kill him. There was insecurity from the enemies. False prophets tried to discourage him. There was also opposition from the Jewish nobles. And lastly, he received false accusations from his enemies. Activities which took place during the dedication of the wall of Jerusalem under the leadership of Nehemiah. Remember these, you have to put down the activities the way they followed each other. So first, Nehemiah summoned the Levites. You can also say he summoned the priests because the priests came from the Levites, and he also summoned political leaders to come to Jerusalem to give thanks to God. The sons of singers gathered around Jerusalem. They sang, praised using musical instruments. The priests who were Levites purified themselves. So you can just call them priests or you can just call them Levites purified themselves. The gates and the wall were purified. Nehemiah brought the prince of Judah. And at number 6, Nehemiah appointed two great groups which went into two great processions. One group was led by Ezra the scribe and went to the right, while the other group was led by Nehemiah and went to the left. Then they converged in the house of God. Women and children rejoiced. You can just say it was a moment of great joy. Nehemiah then chose people who would ensure that the contributions were handled well. Here, when you can also say he chose people who would ensure the tithes and the offerings were handled well. A service of purification was performed, and the wall was dedicated to God in a solemn ceremony. Reasons why Christians find it difficult to help the needy today. Number one, there are too many needy cases. Some Christians lack what to share. It is difficult to identify genuine cases. Tribal affiliations hinder others, or you can just say ethnic affiliations hinder people from helping, because some don't want to help a person from a different tribe from theirs. Number 5, political leanings influence Christians against helping those in need. Poor attitude towards the plight of the poor, or basically we can just call it selfishness or indifference towards the plight of the poor. There is a poor communication, or rather infrastructure challenge in some parts of the country, that if you want to go there and help, you cannot be able to access those areas. There is also misappropriation of resources meant for assisting the poor. So people assist and then they find out that later their donations were mishandled, that even the poor did not get it, or they were not assisted. So they find it difficult to help again the needy. And there is also, lastly, insecurity or hostility. We are going to look at question 5a in this year's kcse, the dedication of the wall of Jerusalem under the leadership of Nehemiah. So, because they normally get the answers from the Bible, we are going to read Nehemiah chapter 12 from verse 27 to 43, the Revised Standard Version. Dedication of the city wall. Now, at the dedication of the wall of Jerusalem, they sought out the Levites in all their places to bring them to Jerusalem to celebrate the dedication with rejoicing, with thanksgiving, and with singing, with cymbals, harps, and lyres. The companies of the singers gathered together from the circuit around Jerusalem and from the villages of the Netophathites, also from Beth Gilgal and from the region of Geba and Asmaveth, but the singers had to build for themselves villages around Jerusalem. And the priests and the Levites purified themselves, and they purified the people in the gates and the wall. Then I brought the leaders of Judah up onto the wall and appointed 2 great companies that gave thanks and went in possession. One went to the right on the wall to the dark gate, and after them went Hoshea and half the officials of Judah, and Azariah, Ezra, Meshullam, Judah, Benjamin, Shemaiah, and Jeremiah. And some of the young priests with trumpets, Zechariah, son of Jonathan, son of Shemaiah, son of Mattaniah, son of Micaiah, son of Zakah, son of Asaph, and his kindred, Shemaiah, Azarel, Melalai, Ilalai, Mai, Nathaniel, Judah, and Hanani, with the musical instruments of David, the man of God, and the scribe Ezra went in front of them. At the fountain gate in front of them, they went straight up by the stairs of the city of David and the ascent of the wall above the house of David to the water gate on the east. The other company of those who gave thanks went to the left, and I followed them with half of the people on the wall, above the tower of the ovens to the broad wall, and above the gate of Ephraim, and by the old gate, and by the fish gate, in the tower of Hananel, and the tower of 100 to the sheep gate, and they came to a halt at the gate of the guard. So both companies of those who gave thanks stood in the house of God, and I and half of the officials with me, and the priests Eliakim, Messiah, Ninimin, Micaiah, Elionai, Zechariah, and Ananiah, with trumpets, and Messiah, Shemaiah, Elazar, Uzi, Jehonan, Machijah, Elam, and Ezra, and the singers sang with Jezariah and their leader. They offered great sacrifices that day and rejoiced, for God had made them rejoice with great joy. The women and the children also rejoiced. The joy of Jerusalem was heard far away. So now we are going to look at the main points. Now you were to explain What was important to mention in explaining the dedication of the wall of Jerusalem? Number one, Nehemiah summoned the Levites, or you can call them the priests, to come to Jerusalem to give thanks to God. The sons of the singers gathered around Jerusalem. They sang and praised God using musical instruments. The Levites, or you can call them the priests, or rather the people, purified themselves. The gates were purified. Nehemiah brought the Nehemiah brought the prince or the princess of Judah. Nehemiah appointed two great groups which went in two processions. One group, led by Ezra, the scribe, went to the right, while the other group, led by Nehemiah, went to the left. They then converged in the house of God. The people, led by the priests, offered sacrifices of dedication to God. Women and children rejoiced, or rather, you can say it was a moment of joy for women and children. Nehemiah then chose people who would ensure that the contributions, or rather the tithes, or you can call them the offerings, were handled well. Then a service of purification was performed. Thanks a lot for subscribing and listening to me. God bless you. Welcome. Today we are going to look at the reasons why Nehemiah carried out religious reforms in Judah. Remember, this was question 5B in this year's kcse CRE paper 1. So in order to understand better where they got the answers, we are going to read Nehemiah chapter 13, the Revised Standard Version. On that day, they read from the book of Moses in the hearing of the people, and in it was found written that no Ammonite or Moabite should ever enter the assembly of God, for they did not meet the children of Israel with bread and water. I had Balaam against them to curse them, yet our God turned the curse into a blessing. When the people heard the law, they separated from Israel all those of foreign descent, the reforms of Nehemiah. Now before this, Eli'ashib the priest, who was appointed over the chambers of the house of our God, and who was connected with Tobi'ah, prepared for Tobi'ah a large chamber where they had previously put the cereal offering, the frankincense, the vessels, and the tithes of grain, wine, and oil, which were given by commandment, the Levites, singers, and the gatekeepers, and the contributions for the priests. While this was taking place, I was not in Jerusalem, for in the 32nd year of Artaxerxes, king of Babylon, I went to the king. And after some time, I asked leave of the king and came to Jerusalem. And I then discovered the evil that Eli'ashib had done for Tobiah, preparing for him a chamber in the courts of the house of God. And I was very angry, and I threw all the household furniture of Tobiah out of the chamber. Then I gave orders, and they cleansed the chambers, and I brought back thither the vessels of the house of God, with the cereal offering and the frankincense. I also found out that the portions of the Levites had not been given to them, so that the Levites and the singers who did the work had fled each to his field. So I remonstrated the officials and said, "Why is the house of God forsaken?" And I gathered them together and set them in their stations. Then all Judah brought the tithe of the grain, wine, and oil into the storehouses. And I appointed as treasurers over the houses Shemaiah the priest, Zadok the scribe, and Bedaiah of the Levites, and as the assistant Hanan the son of Zakah, son of Mattaniah, for they were counted faithful, and their duty was to distribute to their brethren. Remember me, O my God, concerning these, and wipe not out my good deeds that I have done for the house of my God and for his service. Sabbath reforms began. In those days, I saw in Judah men treading wine presses on the Sabbath and bringing in heaps of grain and loading them on asses, and also wine, grapes, figs, and all kinds of burdens, which they brought in Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. And I warned them on the day when they sold food. Men of Tyre also, who lived in the city, brought in fish and all kinds of wares and sold them on the Sabbath to the people of Judah and in Jerusalem. Then I remonstrated the nobles of Judah and said to them, "What is this evil thing which you are doing, profaning the Sabbath day? Did not your fathers act in this way, and did not our God bring all this evil on us and on this city? Yet you bring more wrath upon Israel by profaning the Sabbath." When it began to be dark at the gates of Jerusalem before the Sabbath, I commanded that the doors should be shut and gave orders that they should not be opened until after the Sabbath. And I sent some of my servants over the gates, that no burden might be brought in on the Sabbath day. And the merchants and the sellers of all kinds of wares launched outside Jerusalem once or twice. But I warned them and said to them, "Why do you lodge before the wall? If you do so again, I will lay hands on you." From that time on, they did not come on the Sabbath, and I commanded the Levites that they should purify themselves and come and guard the gates to keep the Sabbath day holy. Remember these also in my favor, O my God, and spare me according to the greatness of thy steadfast love. Mixed marriages condemned. In those days also I saw the Jews who had married women of Ashdod, Ammon, and Moab. And half of their children spoke the language of Ashdod, and they could not speak the language of Judah, but the language of each people. And I contended with them, and cursed them, and beat some of them, and pulled out their hair. And I made them take oath in the name of God, saying, "You shall not give your daughters to their sons, or take their daughters for your sons, or for yourselves." Did not Solomon king of Israel sin on account of such women? Among the many nations there was no king like him, and he was beloved by God. And God made him king over all Israel. Nevertheless, foreign women made even him to sin. Shall we then listen to you and do all this great evil, and act treacherously against our God by marrying foreign women? And one of the sons of Jehoiada, the son of Eli'ashib, the high priest, was the son-in-law of Sanballat the Horonite. Therefore I chased him from me. Remember them, O my God, because they have defiled the priesthood and the covenant of the priesthood and the Levites. Thus I cleansed them from everything foreign, and I established the duties of the priests and Levites, each in his work. And I provided for the wood offering at appointed times, and for the first fruits, remember me, O my God, for good. That is the word of the Lord. Religious reforms in Judah. Number one, to preserve the identity of the Jews as the people of God. Number two, to separate the Jews from foreign influence. Number three, to purify the temple which had been defiled by keeping a foreigner. Number four, to reinstate the services of the Levites as priests, or rather singers of the temple. Number five, to restore the tithing system that had been forgotten for the upkeep of the temple. Another reason why also Nehemiah carried out religious reforms in Judah is to ensure that the Sabbath day was free from business activities, or rather to ensure that the Sabbath day was kept holy. Is still the same point. Number seven, Nehemiah wanted the Israelites to remain faithful to the covenant way of life. And then, number eight, he wanted to uphold the Hebrew language of the covenant people, which had been neglected due to intermarriages. And at number nine, to restore true worship of Yahweh, or rather to restore the true worship of God. We are going to outline and explain what antisocial conducts hindered by the reconstruction of the Jewish community. That is from Nehemiah chapter 5 from verse 1 to 13. And then we state the duties of the renewed and restored Israel community. Lastly, we explain the relevance of Nehemiah's experience to Christians today. Before we show what antisocial conducts hindered by the reconstruction of the Jewish community, we are going first to read Nehemiah chapter 5 from verse 1 to 13 so that we can get the main points. Nehemiah deals with oppression. Now there was a great outcry of the people and of their wives against their Jewish king. But there were those who said, with our sons and our daughters, we are many. We must get grain so that we may eat and stay alive. There were also those who said, we are having to pledge our fields, our vineyards, and our houses in order to get grain during the famine. And there were those who said, we are having to borrow money on our fields and vineyards to pay the king's tax. Now our flesh is the same as that of our kindred. Our children are the same as their children. And yet we are forcing our sons and daughters to be slaves. And some of our daughters have been ravished. We are powerless, and our fields and vineyards now belong to others. I was very angry when I heard their outcry and these complaints. After thinking it over, I brought charges against the nobles and the officials. I said to them, you are all taking interest from your own people, and I called a great assembly to deal with them, and said to them, as far as we were able, we have brought back our Jewish kindred who had been sold to other nations. But now you are selling your own king, who must then be bought back by us. They were silent and could not find a word to say. So I said, the thing that you are doing is not good. Should you not walk in the fear of our God, prevent the towns of the nations our enemies? Moreover, I and my brothers and my servants are lending them money and grain. Let us stop this taking of interest. Restore to them this very day their fields, their vineyards, their olive orchards, and their houses, and the interest on money, grain, wine, and oil that you have been exalting from them. Then they said, we will restore everything and demand nothing more from them. We will do as you say. And I called the priests and made them take an oath to do as they had promised. I also shook out the fold of my garment and said, so may God shake out everyone from house and from the property who does not perform this promise. Thus may they be shaken out and emptied. And all the assembly said, Amen. And I praised the Lord, and the people did as they had promised. So antisocial conducts hindered by the reconstruction of the Jewish community. Number 1, mortgaging of children to buy food. Number 2, mortgaging of their fields, vineyard and houses to get grains. Slavery of their sons and daughters. Number 4, famine due to failure in agricultural productivity. Population increase which contribute to instability of the community. The widening gap between the rich and the poor. Heavy taxation on the people such as tribute tax and poll tax. And lastly, high interest rates charged on loans. Now we are going to state the duties of the renewed and restored Israel community. Number 1, they were to preserve the community's integrity. Number 2, they were not to intermarry with foreigners. They were to leave crops of the 7th year to widows and orphans. They were to keep the Sabbath day holy. They were to obey God's commandment and laws. They were to cancel all debts owed to them by their kinsmen. They were also supposed to dedicate their firstborn sons, animals, and fruits to God. They were to supply what was required for regular worship. Lastly, they were to provide sacrifices and offerings to God. And lastly, we are going to explain the relevance of Nehemiah's experience to Christians today. Relevance is how closely are they connected, or how are the experiences of Nehemiah appropriate to Christians today? So you should say what Christians should do. Number one, Christians should expect opposition as Nehemiah did. Number two, Christians should persevere in God's work. Christians need to seek God's guidance constantly through prayers. Christians have moral obligations to condemn injustice. Christians should be on the look for external pressure which may affect true Christians' faith. And lastly, Christians learn that leadership involves suffering, persecution, and sacrifice. The promises which the Israelites made during the renewal of the covenant under Nehemiah. So the first promise that they made is that to live according to God's law. That is, to obey the commandment. Number two, to cancel debts every 7th year. That is, not to farm every 7th year. Number three, they would not intermarry with foreigners living in the land. They would contribute to annual temple expenses, meaning that they will ensure that the temple was not neglected. Another promise which the Israelites made during the renewal of the covenant and Nehemiah is to arrange for provision of wood for burnt offering as per the law. They would offer first fruits of the crops, or you can say they would dedicate their firstborns, or even they would offer their first flocks. Number 7, they promised to pay tithe as per the law. And at number 8, to observe the Sabbath. That meant that they were not to do business on the Sabbath. Thanks a lot for subscribing and listening to me. God bless you.